Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Atlantic Council. My name is Bilal Saab. I'm a senior fellow and director of the Middle East Peace and Security Initiative here at the Atlantic Council. I'm glad to welcome you all here today for what I'm confident to be an engaging and forward-looking conversation on energy innovation in the Middle East. Today's discussion is a true collaborative effort of the Council, co-hosted by the Global Energy Center and the Brent Scowcroft Center on International Security's Middle East Peace and Security Initiative. We're also fortunate to have with us Mirat Mabrouk, Deputy Director and Director of Research and Programs of the Council's Rafiq Hariri Center for the Middle East. If the key to long-term security is good governance and sound economics, then creating a more effective role for the energy sector becomes vital for the national well-being of any country in the region. So today's topic is quite important for the future of the Middle East. Energy innovation offers an opportunity for sustainability in a region so often characterized by conflict, crises, and just bad economics. It's exciting to see countries like Lebanon, the UAE, Jordan, Turkey, and Saudi Arabia, to name only a few, pursuing ambitious projects to harness sources of renewable energy, reduce their dependency on oil, and create economic opportunities for the large and growing youth population in the region. As this is an area of continuing importance to regional stability and security, I'm very glad to be here today to introduce this very expert and interesting panel of speakers. They each bring really a unique perspective on this topic given their different backgrounds. Now, as I mentioned at the opening, we're delighted to have Mirat Mabrouk, Deputy Director of the Hariri Center, with us to moderate today's discussion. Mirat will be joined on the panel by Julia Neshwat, an old friend of mine, Presidential Deputy Envoy for Hostage Affairs at the State Department, but also has many years of experience in the energy field. His Excellency Majid Al-Suwaidi, Consul General of the UAE in New York, who also has played a significant role in his country's energy diplomacy and portfolio. And my fellow Lebanese, Salah Tabara, an old friend, General Manager of Albina Industrial Construction Company in Lebanon, an energy entrepreneur in every sense of the word, who traveled from Beirut to be with us here today. Taking a strategic view on the issues that affect regional security interests is really key to the work of the Scowcroft Center and the Council more broadly. Questions of energy sustainability and security of the broader Middle East remain crucial to U.S. national interest and strategy, and the Council is tackling these issues along several lines of effort. I'll just mention a few briefly. Under the bipartisan co-chairmanship of former Secretary of State Madeleine Albright and former National Security Advisor Stephen Hadley, the Atlantic Council convened the Middle East Strategy Task Force in February of 2015 to bring together regional stakeholders and international experts to develop a long-term U.S. strategy to help address the Middle East's most acute strategic issues by directly engaging regional citizens and stakeholders. The task force released the final report of the co-chairs in November of just last year. The co-chairs' final report lays out a new strategic approach in which the leaders and peoples of the region must take responsibility for charting a new positive vision for their societies. The report itself, I would encourage you to download a copy of it off the website. That task force was a joint initiative of the Council's Rafiq Hariri Center and the Brent Scowcroft Center on International Security. Speaking of the Scowcroft Center, which is working on the strategy task force, had also undertaken major projects on trends and future scenarios in the region. We're looking forward to do even more work in this space in collaboration with a new initiative at the Scowcroft Center called Strategy, Foresight, and Risks Initiative, headed by just my neighbor next door, Matt Burrows, its director. And of course, the Global Energy Center launched its inaugural Global Energy Forum in Abu Dhabi this past January in partnership with the Ministry of Energy of the UAE, ADNOC, and Mubadala. That forum addressed the geopolitics and geoeconomics of the energy transformation, and particularly in the Gulf region. We are just so glad and fortunate to have the opportunity to extend this for 3 more years, so look for us also next year in January in Abu Dhabi. On the policy side of things, of course, the center has been looking at issues related to oil and gas, energy transition, and economic diversification in energy-producing countries. So I've said too much. Let me just say the final, words regarding the online activities of this event. We're gonna use Twitter basically with the hashtag MideastEnergy, and then we're gonna try to follow by using at AC Global Energy and at AC Scowcroft. With that, Murat, the floor is yours.
Thank you. So, ladies and gentlemen, everyone here all right? Okay. So thank you for joining us today for what promises to be a very lively and very engaging conversation about an important topic. Now, traditionally speaking, the Middle East has become almost synonymous with fossil fuels, and there is no doubt that that's been a blessing for much of the region. However, all good things come to an end, and the end of this particular blessing is within sight. That's a challenge. However, challenges do bring opportunities, and the region, much of the region, is actually rising to meet this challenge head on. New challenges and opportunities bring new paradigms, and we're looking at new paradigms, new models of engagement between public and private sector, and new models for entrepreneurship and innovation. So we're going to kick straight off to the panel, and I would like to start off by asking the Consul General of the UAE to tell us about why you think the UAE has made such leaps and bounds in this particular field. I mean, you're really taking it on, and you're trying to become a hub for innovation and technology in this area. So why do you think it's important, and why are you doing that? How are you doing that?
Yeah, thank you very much for having me today here. It's really a pleasure to have the opportunity to talk to you about this really important topic to our country. For the UAE, I think it's, and you mentioned that this was about countries seeing that the end of the blessing was in sight. I don't know whether I would necessarily agree with that interpretation when it comes to the UAE. I think that for us, that's often the perception that a lot of people have, is that that's the reason for the process we're undergoing. In fact, for the UAE, this is a project that has started from the very beginning of our country's founding. Many of my grandfather's generation and my father even were a people who were dependent on pearl diving as an industry, if you don't mind me telling a little bit of a story. And that was the main source of income in the UAE. And as you all know, Japanese invented the artificial pearl. And so for a lot of people of my grandfather's generation and my father's generation, they saw their main source of income disappearing overnight, their main industry disappearing overnight. So when oil and gas was discovered in our country, I think that they had that foresight to see that this was a natural resource that they had today, but that wouldn't be there necessarily forever. We don't see that oil and gas necessarily is finite. In fact, as a reservoir geologist in a previous lifetime, I know that we have plenty for many years to come. But what we do recognize is, like any technology, new technologies come along, and you need to be part of that. You need to be part of that transformation. That hindsight that came from having that experience with the pearl industry meant that the UAE recognized very early also that we needed to diversify our economy. We couldn't be dependent on one natural resource. So from the very beginning of our founding, our leadership has wisely invested in alternative sectors other than oil and gas. And many of you know about the aviation sector, tourism in Dubai, the financial sectors in Dubai, and other aspects of the economy that our government has invested a lot into. And so renewables is really one part of that diversification process. the government and our leadership have wisely seen that today we provide one type of energy, and hopefully in the future we could provide another type of energy. Alongside that, there's also a piece of environmental stewardship that is part of the DNA of our country. You know, many of us were, pearl divers, but also Bedouin people. My father and grandfather's generation were people who lived off the land, and so had an understanding of the importance of environmental stewardship and the use of natural resources for the future in a responsible way. So when we approach every aspect of the growth of our country, we look at it from a green growth point of view. And so the government has a green growth strategy that's been in place for many years now, and at every level of government we think about how we can grow our economy in a way that is sustainable and that leads to long-term growth. So our investment in these areas is really with that in view, is how to develop a country that is growing sustainably, and an energy mix is an important part of that, and a diversified economy is fundamental to achieving that, and that will create the green jobs and the new types of jobs that you want for future generations of Emirati citizens.
Thank you. So that actually raises another very important question. Job creation. Job creation. How instrumental do you think this is going to be in countering regional levels of high unemployment? Do you see opportunities for employment, entrepreneurship, gender employment? Because traditionally speaking, of course, fossil fuels have not been an area where too many women have been employed.
I think in other countries that would be true. I think in the UAE you'll find, in fact, that women play a huge role in our industry. I used to work in our national oil company. In fact, I worked in ExxonMobil had a technology center partnership that was a center for excellence. And I was one of 10 Emirati geoscientists and engineers. 8 of those were female. And the other 2 were me and one other guy. So in fact, there is an imbalance of women certainly in the company that I worked in, there was a gender imbalance in the opposite direction. The UAE is the only country in the world, I learned this fact recently, where women actually earn 2.1% on average more than men. So in our country, gender equality has been fundamental also to our development. I think that it, of course, is critical for the topic of innovation and entrepreneurship is really critical as we start to look at how we get young people employed in the private sector, taking jobs in non-oil and gas industry sectors, but also generating new companies, startups, things like that, that will hopefully create new jobs for us in our country.
Thank you so much. So if I can turn to Julie at the moment. As we've just heard, the UAE is an outlier in many cases, but in a more global sense and perhaps in a regional sense, how much development are we seeing go down this road?
Absolutely. Well, again, first, a big thanks to Bilal and to you, Murat, for having us here today. It's a pleasure to be here at the Atlantic Council. I think it's important to first understand, as Majid was just saying, diversification is going to be essential. Energy is the lifeblood of our economic policy, of our foreign policy. So to be able to look at this and look at the global trends is essential. We talk about, enjoying wonderful low oil and gas prices today here in the United States, but what does that really mean globally when we look at alternatives and renewables? But I wrote down a few statistics, and I think it's important that we all have a fair understanding. Just last year, for example, the average levelized cost of the total cost of generating power from solar, for example, worldwide has dropped 17%. Onshore wind costs dropped 18%, and offshore wind turbine power costs fell 28%. So just knowing that the costs of renewables and alternatives, where 5 or 10 years ago it was just unheard of to compete with hydrocarbons, is now becoming more competitive. Last year, there's been more gigawatts of solar power that was added, about 75 gigawatts, than any other technology for the first time, and trailing behind all of that, looking at what net can be installed when you look at wind, comparing that to coal, to gas, to large hydroelectric, as well as nuclear and biomass. So renewable energy has accounted for about 55% of the new worldwide power just last year, a total of 138.5 gigawatts. So if you put all of these numbers into play, thinking about that, comparing the 127 of new renewable energy in 2015, and then renewable power that was just installed last year in 2016, that was done at a 23% lower cost than the year before. I mean, we're seeing that increase every year, which has been tremendous. But that, to me, looking at those global trends, then ties into, as we look more regionally into the Middle East, where we see that economic growth. And of course, we've all heard and talked about how this could potentially help with job creation, especially in countries like Lebanon and Jordan, and the effects of refugees coming from Syria and so forth. So understanding those global trends, I think, will certainly create significant investment opportunity. I look in the crowd today and just the attendees. I know we've got public sector policymakers here, business folks, academia and think tanks, and I think we all have a role in this altogether. So, but I'm happy to talk more about the U.S. perspective if you'd like.
That would be great, and maybe hang on to that
Yes.
thought, because that would be wonderful. And so, if we're talking about global development, and again, people tend to think of it as an area where the Gulf states are doing well. But of course, one of the things about renewable energy is that it is a great leveler. So Salah, perhaps you could tell us a little bit more about specifically in renewable energy as you're seeing it play out.
Thank you very much, Miret, for having us. It's good to be sitting with Julia and Majd, because Julia gives you a global perspective of the industry, while on that spectrum, the UAE is on the forefront of innovation, specifically related to renewable energy. Lebanon is a very specific country. We're living on a fault line with everything happening around us. To give a sort of a perspective of the industry and of the energy sector in Lebanon, it's important that briefly we go to have an overview of that sector. So pre-2011, that's prior to the Syrian war in Lebanon, our sector, our energy sector, had a deficit of around 2,000 megawatts. And this is due mainly because of a lack of decision-making on the political level. You know, Lebanon is very much polarized. Our state electricity company, EDL, has the monopoly for generation, transmission, and distribution. And historically, for the last at least 20 years, EDL has been losing around $1 billion per year that has been supported by the state. And this is mainly because of the price of oil. We have very old generating technology based on HFO, heavy fuel oil, and diesel. Add to this technical losses and non-technical losses, people connecting to the grid, specifically in areas where the government is not very much present. We had around $1 to $1.2 billion in losses. So half of our debt in Lebanon directly came from the electricity sector. Post-2011, Lebanon has seen an influx of around 1.5 million Syrian refugees. And these refugees need everything from water to electricity to healthcare. And our infrastructure took a beating out of this influx of refugee because it was not coupled with an upgrade in our infrastructure. From an electricity perspective, we needed an extra 700 megawatt of electricity. The Lebanese government decided to rent ships. So we had 2 power ships on the Lebanese coast giving around 400 megawatt. So this is the general view of what we have in our country. Major challenges, because again, Lebanon being polarized, 50% of the Lebanese population versus the other 50, each one has a different agenda. Decision making is not being able to see fast and effective decision making on all levels in our country. In 2009, under the premiership of President Hariri, at the COP15 in Copenhagen, there was a very strong commitment to have 12% of our energy based out of renewable, around 500 megawatt. And it is at that time that we have decided, with a couple of young Lebanese entrepreneurs, to start looking for potential lands to build the first wind farm in Lebanon. And an important note that we all have to understand is that the cost of kilowatt is costing us today around 14 to 15 cents, whereby the government is subsidizing that cost at 12 cents. And this is why we have these losses on a yearly basis, assuming the price of oil, the barrel of oil is at $60. So in 2009, we decided to venture into wind, and then we found an amazing land that's 7 kilometers away from the Syrian border. They call it the point of entry of wind into the Homs plain. We did all the necessary works to take part in the first tender offering by the Lebanese government, and we're glad to say that we came the lowest price at 11.3 cents the kilowatt, US cent the kilowatt. We expect project award very soon because there was a new understanding between the various political parties in Lebanon. Major challenges are still in place, namely the security situation in bordering Syria. But that being said, it's a bankable project because our local banks are very bullish. We have a deficit of around 3,000 megawatt that has to be filled from somewhere. So all in all, major challenges still exist in Lebanon, but we're seeing private initiatives seeing the light, such as our wind project in that country.
To pick up from there, if I can jump straight to you, how do you think the state can encourage private entrepreneurship?
I think it plays a really important role, especially in projects like renewables, where the returns are long-term. I think that's been a challenge historically for a lot of energy projects. And so the UAE really has set a role, been a role model in this sense, a leadership role, in that what we tend to do is these public-private partnerships where the government will set the goals and the targets. So for instance, we have a 27% renewable energy target for the UAE, which is quite ambitious for our country. And the government sets those targets and then works with private partnerships and through a combination of different policy tools to try to encourage private sector involvement in the development of renewable energy projects, but then also has government projects that work alongside that. Masdar is our renewable energy project. It has three aspects to it. One is the R&D component, which is a partnership with MIT, where it's a graduate level research university in Abu Dhabi that does R&D into renewable energy technologies and therefore takes students from around the world on full scholarships. Then there's Masdar City, which is really a living laboratory for the technologies that are developed in the institute. And so you can go and visit today the buildings, and you can see the energy efficiency projects that are there. You can see the deployment of renewable energy. There's a solar field. And all of those are about deploying in the real world the technologies that you're developing. And then there's Masdar, the investment arm or the investment company, which invests not only in projects in the UAE, but also abroad. So we are one of the largest partners in the London Array, Gemma Solar in Spain, and many, many other projects around the world where they invest capital in projects that are bankable. The key thing with our government is that all of this has to have a return. So the approach is very much a private sector approach, that there's an initial support from the government to start these companies, but that these companies then have to make a living and they have to make a return. They are not supported by the government. And that really drives these to operate like businesses, and they partner with others like Siemens, GE, other types of international players to try and deploy the best technology possible and to generate income. And that has been a model that's really been successful for us. If you look in Dubai, the model has been slightly different, a lot more about deregulation, inviting the private sector to come in and invest. And there also you've seen that the success has been, there has been success in that today we have the lowest solar energy prices in the world. 3 cents per kilowatt hour, which is cheaper than natural gas. Which, if you think about an oil and gas producing country where solar power is cheaper than natural gas, it's phenomenal. So it just goes to show that if you create the right environment for investment, that the financing will come. It's really about having the right environment for those entrepreneurs in the private sector to be able to come and participate in the project. Also shows that a diversity of approach can be effective. So tailoring your approach to the circumstances of the project or the situation that you're in is really important. I think often we like to think about a silver bullet policy that's going to solve everything, and in fact the world doesn't work like that. The world's diversified and every country has different challenges and opportunities, and so tailoring the policy environment to suit the country itself is really important. Yeah.
So diversification, deregulation.
I think so, yeah. I think that those are really the key.
Brilliant, thank you. Julia, can I jump to you for a second, because I know that you had some specific examples on this. Please.
No, not at all. And this is great. I think we're exactly in sync because, you know, you think about the question of the U.S. perspective and that stability in the Middle East, but it is absolutely the key part of this principle of diversification. I mean, this is what's going to create that stability, whether it's because of a terrorist attack or if an oil or gas plant is not working properly, you know, or just a general spook to the market. I mean, the markets are interconnected, so to be able to have those diverse resources, to not rely on a single source is going to be tremendous. And speaking of Abu Dhabi, I mean, it's such a great hub. IRENA, the International Renewable Energy Agency, is also based there. So this is just such a tremendous effort, especially from the R&D standpoint, which I think is great. The other aspect of this is just less volatility. I mean, being able to look at that impact. As I said, the markets are interconnected, and I think it's important to understand that while, again, we follow the oil and gas markets, when we have such low prices per kilowatt, it would be able to create a better sense of that stability. And that, I think, is why, you know, we get that question quite a bit of why does the U.S. really take that interest, because it does affect us here at the home front. We see this as a national security issue. It's certainly an engine for economic growth as well, because we're also looking to promote U.S. investments in the Middle East, as you can imagine. So, and whether it's a partnership or a joint venture, that could be one possibility. But we certainly see that as an area of great opportunities and investment. And as Majid said, though, in order to attract that investment, though, you have to have some sense of stability with your basic necessities of resources, whether it's clean water, you know, having the power on. I mean, this ties into the nexus of food and health as well. But it's amazing to see that interconnectedness overall.
Thank you, please.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to what Julia says, because I think it's such an important discussion, is that really what we're talking about here is a revolution in the energy markets. We used to think of energy as being these large utilities in countries that were led by governments, and they were focused on your domestic energy market. Now you see grids, cross-border grids that are connected. You're seeing new ways of generating power through rooftop solar, storage in battery packs in your home, smart housing where you're looking at energy efficiency. There's so many more complexities to how we get energy from the generation source to the consumer, and globalization is changing the landscape as well. So you have to think about those new ways that you deliver power to people, and so the old models that we're used to thinking about don't apply. And so if that's the case, that how energy is being supplied, the finance and how that's being supplied is also going to change. So we have to think that about creating these environments where finance can come to it and feel secure that they're going to get the returns on investment that they put into these projects. So the revolution in how energy is being deployed is there, and we need to see a revolution in how the financing happens and the policy making happens as well, which always catches up often to technology, doesn't it?
And competition can be very healthy. So to be able to get other companies to come to the table, it would certainly benefit the people overall.
I mean,
Yeah.
I have two important points that I
Please.
would like to discuss. First of all, definitely, like Majid said, renewable energy has created a whole different new ballgame for individual players like myself. I mean, 10 years ago, it was the EDFs and the ENIs of this world. And now you have projects for 20 megawatts and 30 megawatts of small developers who came into play, and it has created a huge market, and it has changed market fundamentals tremendously. Now, on a second note about Lebanon and the importance of Lebanon. First of all, if you want to compare Lebanon to Jordan or Lebanon to the UAE, where an eventual project for solar or wind, you would have seen probably 60, 70 companies trying to compete and bid for this project, because these countries provide stability and there's a sense of credibility. Versus Lebanon, you have 2, 3 players, and these players are local players. And this tells you a lot. Once you bring in government, let's say, regulation by giving a fair chance to everyone with a proper, stable environment, this makes the whole difference in competitivity. But why is Lebanon important, and how would Lebanon impact the surrounding countries and areas? Well, first of all, we have a very big Lebanese diaspora from Brazil to Australia, and we've seen that Lebanese in West Africa have been, if you want, on the forefront of innovation, where you have technologies and industries that are being set up with European and American standards being replicated in these countries, and that's just fantastic. So any success in renewable energy and energy in Lebanon could be directly replicated in countries like Nigeria and Ghana and what have you, because of the presence of a very strong business Lebanese community in these countries. It's funny because one of the turbine suppliers we're discussing is with GE. And you know, GE have certain requirements before they even give you a quote. And one of the main issues is to get clearance from the State Department, the US Embassy in Lebanon, before they quote us to come and visit the site. And the site being 70 kilometers away from Syria, that's a major challenge in trying to explain to them that, you know, it's actually safe to go there. So these are things that we face on a day-to-day basis that are very specific to our country, Lebanon. But again, on the plus side, having a project in our country could be replicated in surrounding in areas where Lebanese are very well present. And then you have the offshore gas in our economic exclusive zone. And this will eventually bring stability to the region if properly played. So we're optimistic, conservatively optimistic, but again, there's some serious work that needs to be done to get investors' appetite into our country.
Can you go into a little bit more detail about the serious work that needs to be done?
About?
The serious work that needs to be done.
I mean, we had a discussion with Julia before coming into that panel session, and her question was, why don't we separate the politics from development work, such as electricity, water. I mean, we've been discussing for the last 6 years a PPP law in our parliament, and you know, there's absolutely no answer why this PPP law has not gotten through yet. My assessment is Lebanon is, believe it or not, still very tribal. Tribal slash politics are personal interest coupled with multi-confessional, well, people hide behind their ethnicity, if you want, or religious sect for personal interest. Add to that the regional accesses that are very much present through funding and through manpower on the ground. And this has created a status quo where no decision is able to go through on that level. So the logic is that let's keep politics away from development work is not a silver bullet, as Majid said.
Well, politics and development do tend to be intertwined. It's very, very difficult to separate them. And perhaps on that note, so less than 2 weeks ago, 14 Arab countries got together and decided to sign a memorandum of understanding on an Arab common market for electricity. Now, arguably, one of the more successful regional partnerships has been the GCC, and the countries of the GCC, so again, arguably share a geographic compatibility and demographic similarity, and most important, an economic parity, if you like. So with these 14 countries involved, what do you, how do you rate chances of success based on, if we take into account some of the things that Salah just said, which will translate not only into Lebanon, but into other countries as well?
I think that the chances for success are good. I think the UAE is particularly committed to partnering with our fellow countries in the region for stability in our region. Of course, for us, as a country that's interested in trade and commerce, regional stability is, of course, critical. It's fundamental for us to be able to grow and develop. And so our government is committed to working with all partners to try and ensure stability. The grid connections with Saudi Arabia and other countries around us are really important when we start to look at how we diversify our energy portfolios and how we start to trade energy. As you know, the UAE is building a safe civil nuclear energy as a program that's in partnership with the US government and others, and is really a gold standard for how you can use civil nuclear power. And with that comes a base load of power that can be shared with other countries for their needs, and so and exported, and that of course has benefits to everybody around us, both in terms of reducing emissions, but also reducing costs for those around and the project as a whole. So we need to see more examples of this kind of cooperation around these issues that will help to encourage stability. All of our countries around us have an interest in low energy prices, because as we start to move to these new industries, they are competing on a global stage with other competitors. And there's a misconception that we subsidize power to our industries. In fact, we don't. In fact, they often are paying some of the highest energy prices in the world for power. And so trying to find ways to reduce the energy bills for our industries is really important to allow those industries to grow and develop that can then take us away from dependence on fossil fuels. So stability is really important, and that will come from partnerships with our community around us, and a desire from them to move towards a stable economic growth.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you so much. Julia, what do you think the prospects are for not just regional partnerships, but global partnerships?
Absolutely. I mean, there's such a theme here. When you think of I mean, how you define energy security. I mean, it's safety, it's reliability, it's affordability. So in order to think regionally, you have to also look at it from a global standpoint. And I see the same things in Europe. You know, when you think of the EU speaking with one voice and how they obtain their energy resources from Russia, for example, and as the same applies for Asia as well. I mean, they're right now considering a natural gas hub in Singapore possibly, and we're working with India. So this absolutely does apply to the Middle East, especially because many other countries rely on their energy resources from the Middle East. So it truly is important to think about it from that standpoint as you look at the trends and as you look at the dependency as well, and being able to ultimately diversify that.
Thank you. I think this is about where we have to start, finish this up, and start taking questions from the audience. So thank you so much. Yours was actually the first hand up. I know it sounds wrong, but it was the first hand up. So maybe we take 2 questions at a time, so as to, please. And please do just let us know who you are. Try and keep it to a question, not a comment, so that other people can get a chance to join in. Thank you.
Bilal Saab, I work here at the council. One country that I guess I didn't hear any of the panelists talk about, which is a fairly sizable country, which is Egypt. I wonder if any of the panelists, first of all, excellent presentations. I know this much about energy, and I learned so much from this conversation. But here's a big country, and talk about mismanagement and inefficiency and how to run the energy sector. So I wonder if any of the panelists would be comfortable to just discuss this briefly, and obviously how the future of the country affects the that of neighboring countries, and whether there's any type of cooperation going on between Egypt and any of its neighbors in that field.
I mean, I could start with just thinking about unemployment, for example. I mean, Egypt's youth unemployment is at 40%. I mean, this is a daunting challenge. Here in the United States, we've thought about how we can build on projects from a development standpoint, working regionally, and at the end of the day, it really hits hard both from an infrastructure standpoint, where they will be able to continue to get natural resources through partnering countries, but because of some of that instability within the country, it's been extremely challenging. So I think this is also an opportunity, because you're exactly right, Bilal. Egypt, I personally think, is one of the most challenging countries when it comes to the energy and economic issues, and how we can help solve that. But it really is going to be a regional effort. Partnering countries need to step up to the plate and be able, I mean, there will be some risks associated to that, but I think it'll also take the private sector, a champion, to come in there and be able to get some of those assurances that could at least start one project that could build upon another. In theory, that sounds great, but the practicality behind it, I think, is what's going to be a key question here. I don't know if any of my colleagues.
One of the issues in Egypt is that they wanted payments, developers wanted payments in US dollar versus Egyptian pound. And I've heard the latest info that we got is that they came to an understanding that payments will be eventually done in dollars. And that was the main issue, where developers were not coming into the Egyptian market, because parity was a major issue for these players.
If it helps, I do know that they're working on a $3.5 billion solar plant in Aswan, which is supposed to go online in 2018, and I think it's supposed to generate about 1.4 or 1.5 gigawatts of electricity, which is about 90% of the electricity capacity of the Aswan Dam. So they're working on it, but I don't know more than that. Sir, please.
Yes, I'm Dr. Sam Hancock of Emerald Planet TV, and this is a two-pronged question. One of the things for any project, we know there's a lot of technologies that's becoming much cheaper, wide availability, but the 5 things for any project is money, 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 and money. So looking at that, where do you see, going across all these countries, like in Egypt to Lebanon to even in Syria, other places, and your own UAE, of how that we can find those funds to go across this whole area to bring stability? And the second part of that is that you have this huge resource base of wind and solar across the crescent of northern Africa into your own area to export even into northern Europe to bring stability there instead of dependency on gas out of Russia and other less stable places. So two-part question. But thank you for being here and excellent presentation.
Please.
You know, this is something that comes up all the time, and I used to be a climate change negotiator. I did the negotiations for the SDGs at the UN and financing for development. And during that time, that was for about 4 years, and during that time I heard the same thing all the time: financing, financing, financing. And we did a number of workshops. One in particular I can remember we did in New York, where we brought in all the big banks. We also did the same kind of workshop at ADSW, which is our, if you're not familiar, every year in January we have a big conference, a one-week conference. That's the IRENA General Assembly. That's a whole series of things around renewables and sustainable development. It's Abu Dhabi Sustainability Week. And we did a workshop there where we brought in big financing thing. Every single time the reply was, the money is there. We have the financing. We want to invest in this, in renewables. We want to invest in energy projects. We want to. The financing is not the problem, as far as my assessment. The financing is often the policy environment that you are working with. Do you have the right incentives in place? Do you have the right purchasing legal frameworks? Do you have the right tax structure? Do you have the capacity to handle the project? You know, I can remember we did a project. The UAE has given away $350 million in grant money for renewable energy projects around the world as part of our bidding for IRENA. And we were giving out to Pacific Islands in particular because, as you know, renewable energy projects, a lot of Pacific Islands depend on diesel for power generation. So it's a significant cost for them, not only because it's diesel, but also because they're not paying market prices, they're paying, you know, huge prices. So renewables really make sense in Pacific Islands. And in a lot of cases, it wasn't just about the financing wasn't the problem. The problem was local capacity, the ability to maintain and manage the projects, but also the grid itself, to handle renewables, which of course you know are not steady sources of power, and then the right policy environment that meant that they could handle this new technology. And once you solved all those things, you could deploy the technology. And in one island, I think we halved their electricity bill from a solar energy project. So the benefits can be significant if you have the right policies in place. And that was a big part of what we did in the Financing for Development Agreement in 2015, at the UN, is really about encouraging countries to put in place the right policy environments. And that's where actors like IRENA are really important, taking those examples from around the world, working with a country to set up the right policy environment, sometimes letting them have the right information. So the IRENA, for instance, a big project they had was their big wind atlas. Yeah, which is showing investors where are the right, and countries where are the good places to build wind farms. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done in terms of those aspects of the technology. My feeling is that the financing is not the issue, and that is my impression. Others may have other opinions. Yeah.
Sir?
Hi, my name is Mike Barbero. I'm working some energy projects in the region, and thanks to the panel for this morning's discussion. My question, I guess, is for Julia, is pretty much focused on American businesses. Mm-hmm. Given the status of American Exim Bank, we're at a disadvantage when we compete against our Korean or Chinese or other competitors. Are there any policies or programs to help American companies, because it's in our national interest to be active and
Absolutely.
Contributing in the region? Are there any policies or programs to help level the playing field for us? Thanks.
Thank you. Absolutely. I mean, aside from diplomatically encouraging the strategic importance of having a U.S. company involved, especially if they have the assurances and the technical expertise, I think there are various programs. You may have heard of Select USA as well, that we're able to come to the playing field. Again, we don't get involved with the actual business negotiations per se, but being able to pave the way from a policy standpoint for our companies. Again, I would highlight more from the technology standpoint. The Department of Commerce also has quite a few programs too, and even though, as you can imagine right now, a lot of our departments and offices and agencies are going through some restructuring and some policy reviews, that will still be quite the priority with regards to how we can certainly maintain that playing level field. So I think you'll see a lot of that coming out of the Department of Commerce more than anything, and even a combination of both the Department of Energy and Department of State. Yeah.
Could I make a quick comment about that? The gentleman mentioned the XM Bank. I mean, certainly from our point of view, that is something that's really important for facilitating these projects. I also, the other gentleman mentioned something that I forgot to talk about, was about exporting to other countries. Things like having the XM Bank and having partners like U.S. companies, international players coming together in partnerships is what's going to achieve that networking of power, and creating those markets that encourage a project in North Africa, for instance, being financed and deployed that then can feed power to Europe. You need those kinds of actors to come together to create, again, it's not an issue of the money, it's an issue of the legal or regulatory frameworks that allow those things to happen.
Oh no, I'm terribly sorry.
Hi, Zaid Talbara, BGC Partners. First of all, thank you for your insights. I wanted to touch upon maybe a couple of themes that were discussed. Salah from the private sector and Majid from the public sector. Salah, from a practical perspective, what kind of policies can be put in place, especially in countries with nascent renewable industries, to make jobs for energy entrepreneurs easier? Maybe looking at the UAE as a model, what kind of things would help energy entrepreneurs from a public support perspective?
Thank you. I mean, things are very easy. We don't want to reinvent the wheel. I mean, Europe has subsidized the industry for 6-7 years prior to seeing what we're seeing today in terms of solar and wind footprint in various countries. Our project is really, it's one man standing, it's David against Goliath. So we're not asking for any subsidy from the government. We're just saying, you know what, give us the proper legal framework. And I agree with you, finance is readily available all over the Middle East. I mean, we're seeing companies being set up in Lebanon now, and they're talking about being present for the Syria reconstruction. It's just crazy because it might take a year, it might take another 10 years, but we're seeing companies being set up all over Lebanon because we have a very strong banking sector and we have the infrastructure in terms of ports to actually go and access into Syria. But to go back to your question, it's all about having the proper legal framework, and then we're ready to plug in into our project.
I think it's really a question of creating the right environment for an entrepreneur to start his company. If you think about it, a young person who wants to start their own company, of course, is taking a risk, and or older people. I think we always talk about young people, but sometimes a lot of the entrepreneurs are older too, and they're taking a risk. They're stepping out from their comfort zone, and so they need reassurance that what they're doing is going to help them too. And so that's where the policy piece comes into play, and sometimes government support, incentives, things like that. One of the things that I always think is fascinating is if you look to other technologies, if you look at cell phone technology, for instance, a cell phone is a extremely complicated piece of technology I think we take for granted. But if you go across Africa today, most people have cell phones and most people are using them for their banking. How did that happen? It didn't happen because the government subsidized cell phones in Africa, right? It happened because there was a demand and the regulatory environment or the legal framework allowed for that technology to take off. The same thing can happen for renewables or any other kind of technology that we have. It's about creating the right environment, sometimes supporting it with some incentive schemes or subsidies, if you want to call them, but then allowing them to flourish and take off. And so that is really the key, is to find out how you can do that, how you can make that happen.
We're seeing a lot of that in the microgrid world, especially in remote areas, which is starting to grow tremendously.
Yeah. And one of the things I would say is really interesting is the other actors that are starting to play. Recently, I've been meeting with players like Facebook, who are really interested in power. And you wonder yourself, why is a social media company interested in power? Because, of course, if they get power, they can have computers and then they can sign up for Facebook, right? So different actors and different players are going to be involved in this space. Tesla, ostensibly, is a car company, but now it's really an energy company, you know? So we have to think about these different actors and players who are going to feed into this conversation and not be afraid of that. We need to accept that other people are going to come in and bring in new ideas. Facebook is particularly interested in this kind of off-grid stuff.
Yeah.
Another person who's really a company that's really interested is, of course, Coca-Cola as well. Great networking scheme, and people will buy a cold Coca-Cola before they buy a warm Coca-Cola. So you've got to find power for that cooling system. So I've tried a warm Coca-Cola. It's not a good thing.
Gentleman over there.
Yeah, hi. Andrew Holland of the American Security Project. One of you had mentioned the offshore gas finds in Lebanon, and of course Israel, Cyprus, and Egypt are in various stages of kind of moving forward with this, and there's been talk. It was kind of a big priority for the previous administration and the U.S. government to encourage this as a way to
Bringing people together.
Cross-border peace and working together on this sort of stuff. Is there any indication of how the new leadership at the State Department and the administration is approaching this? Has there been any talk about this? And what's the latest developments in the region on that?
Real quickly, though, are you asking about offshore in Lebanon, in the region, or just in general?
In the Mediterranean.
So of course, Israel, it looks like they're already exploiting it and moving forward with it. And same with Cyprus, and Lebanon's further behind. But I guess my question is first, is the new administration in the United States going to be pushing this like the previous one did? And second, what's next? For Lebanon and Egypt, who are kind of the second or third players coming into this?
Well, I think this goes back, regardless past or present administration, it's going to be about the economic growth. Obviously, is this a good business opportunity as well? Noble Company has been heavily involved, and I think they're continuing those efforts. So I think we would certainly be supportive of that as we look ahead. But at the same time, what would be also best from a strategic standpoint is something that we would certainly continue to explore. And maybe my colleague Salah would.
I mean, as far as the information that I have with regards to the offshore licensing round, again, we were supposed to be way past, way more advanced than we are now. So Lebanon will basically go out to the public and say we have plots 1, 4, 7, 8, 9, 10. And 8, 9, 10 are south of Lebanon, north of Israel. And this is where we might have clashes, because there's around 800 square kilometers that we say it's part of the Lebanese exclusive economic zone, whereas Israel say, no, hey, these are ours. The Ministry of Energy has been shuttling between Beirut and Washington for quite some time now. And we believe that an understanding with the American playing, if you want, an interface between Lebanon and Israel, obviously not directly, but you know, setting the rules or the groundwork for us not to have any clashes between one another. I mean, Israel today came to an agreement with Cyprus to eventually export their gas to Europe. So it's a fourth-party agreement between Italy, Greece, Cyprus, and Israel. We believe that once the licensing round will be set, there are major changes to the region. I mean, Syria is a different story on its own in terms of energy. But for Lebanon, we need to eventually export that gas. And it will have to go through Syria, Turkey, and eventually into Europe or via Cyprus. But economically, it does not make sense to have two pipelines going to Cyprus. So it's very interesting times. The US will definitely have an important role to play, and we're seeing in Lebanon the Exxon and the Total and any of our industry or of this industry being very well represented.
Mm-hmm. Broadway.
Thank you. Marina Ottawa with the Wilson Center. You talked earlier about, in all your presentation, the fact that the cost of alternative energy is going down drastically. You had some very impressive figures. What about I know that there were some technical problems like storage and so on that were in the way of the further development of this. And my question is two parts. One is, how serious are these problems at this point? In other words, are they on the way to being solved? And two, is there any research and development in Arab countries trying to address these problems, or is still an important technology?
So,
please go ahead.
Yeah. So I think that storage is a fundamental issue. I don't think that it's actually a problem right now. Most of the power generated in the UAE comes from natural gas, and soon we'll be having the nuclear power coming online. And so solar works great for filling the gaps. And in the UAE, most of our power demand comes at midday when you have the hottest temperatures, so it's about cooling. So that's where solar actually works quite well, lines up quite well with our peak demand. So in that sense, it's not an issue right now. I can see it being an issue further down the line. Our research and development, Masdar Institute, they work on solar. But I think more generally it is something that needs to be thought about. But I think that there's a lot of work in creative ways of storage. So for instance, in the UAE, a big demand for energy is around desalination. We use the power to create drinking water. And if you think about that, that can be one of the big problems we have is that we currently do it through cogeneration. So we use natural gas and the heat is used for the desalination. What that means is in the wintertime, you are actually have to generate more power to create the water demand, and then vice versa in the summertime, you have more power demand than you need for water. So you get these imbalances. So renewables and nuclear power and these other technologies are really useful because they allow you to stabilize your power and use your power more smartly. And desalinated water can be stored, and that's essentially a storage. It's a battery. So thinking about other ways for storage is really important. If we look at Tesla, the idea there is that
Powerwall.
The Powerwall, that you would have a battery, even that the vehicle itself might be a battery that feeds back into the house at times that are needed. So again, we're in a revolution of how we think about power and that includes the infrastructure and storage and all of those things. Sorry, I interrupted.
No, that was perfect, Majid. Again, this is great how in sync we are in this. This is tremendous. But I'm so glad you brought up storage, because we do tend to think about the renewables and alternatives, and that is still a critical aspect. You can't think about solar particularly or wind if you don't have that battery capacity. And we're seeing that evolution as we speak. It's amazing to see what technologies, whether it's from Tesla or others. So we continue to explore that, and it will certainly have to be a part of it. As he said, there's not a specific challenge at this very moment, because we're seeing more hybrid solutions. Look, the reality is we're still going to be relying on hydrocarbons and fossil fuels for some years to come, but to be able to have that mix with the solar aspect of it, for example, I think will be key. So being able to rely more heavily, you have your targets, 27%, for example, in the UAE, the more you're relying on renewables, the more battery and storage capacity you're going to need, obviously. So even though we're right now in this hybrid stage, I think you're going to see further developments in that world globally, for sure. I know the Chinese have certainly taken a specific interest in this. And also, we also have our national labs here in the United States that have a special R&D work that's ongoing in joint projects that are specifically sponsored for the battery and technology aspect.
Just to add a quick point. I mean, we're seeing in Africa a revolution in a sense that technology has created this lithium battery for micro PV solutions, whereby the user do not have the capacity to actually go and pay for the system as a bulk payment. But because of the telecom industry, the individual user can install payment as a pay-as-you-go system. You go to Africa, you have penetration in terms of the telecom industry at 90%, whereas in small towns and villages, it's too costly for the utility or for the government to actually have the transmission and distribution lines at these villages and in these towns. So this gives the opportunity for these micro PV systems to be the solution for their energy needs, where you have your solar panel, a very high efficiency lithium battery, and then on a monthly basis, you would recharge that battery through a payment over the phone. And this is just a huge revolution for lighting Africa.
I think an important point that was made is really about the fact that hybrid solutions are going to be the solution over certainly the medium term, if not the long term. Certainly we as a country that produce oil and gas or traditional fossil fuels still believe that there is a very important role for that in the medium term that is just inescapable. It's a fact. And so thinking about how you use energy more wisely and with lower emissions is something that is important. Be it through carbon capture and storage technologies, be it through energy efficiency. Energy efficiency is, I think, the topic that people are least interested to talk about, but which is the most important topic.
Has the biggest impact.
Has the biggest impact. In the UAE, simple maintenance of the air conditioning unit in the house can have up to 20 to 30% improvements in the energy efficiency of a building. So if you think about the savings that can have is huge. So the government's put in place regulations to ban the 20% lowest performing air conditioners from the market, and that'll have significant improvements. Changing lighting to LED lighting or more efficient lighting. There's so much gains that can become from simple energy efficiency that I think that we just forget to talk about these things because they're just not fun and they're not exciting, but they have significant impact.
And Majid, that I think ties into the education and the training, particularly in the Middle East. Are we? Yes, there's the cultural aspect that we're used to. I remember times visiting, and you had the air conditioning on and the window open at the same time,
yeah,
and so it's
free energy in Saudi Arabia.
Exactly. So being able to understand culturally and having those educational aspects, whether it's at the elementary level all the way up to the graduate level, I think is key. And I know there's so many programs already that are existing. We're we're seeing both young men and women today, getting their engineering degrees focused on energy technologies and storage technologies. So being able to advocate for that, promoting fellowships and research endeavors and grants would be, I think, essential also for the region.
Gentleman at the back.
Hi, Rabin Pasha, founder of My eDream Incubator in Erbil, Kurdistan region of Iraq. Thank you for this discussion, and especially commend the UAE on its regional leadership across the Fourth Industrial Revolution and its use for social good and the broader stability of the region. So my question is related to supporting entrepreneurship and entrepreneurs insofar as diversifying economy, but also creating jobs to stabilize our region and the younger population. I came as a refugee from Iraq 20 years ago, and I went back 2 years ago after leaving USG to build an incubator in Erbil in Iraq, because, to put it simply, I realized that while technology doesn't have borders and you can help entrepreneurs by engaging them with a broader ecosystem, neither does violent extremism and instability in the region. And when it spreads up from one place, as we've seen, it could easily spread in terms of the mindset, in terms of the cost as well to the rest of the region. So what does have borders, though, again to simplify, is the ecosystem. And what we've realized is how challenging it is to change the inertia of the status quo in a place like Iraq, also Syria, Yemen, as you can imagine, Libya. There are so many examples in the region. How can we build on the leadership of the UAE and the rest of the region? I mean, we've heard a lot of people even speak about Marshall Plan for reconstruction of Syria, of Iraq, and I think the times have changed and we all realize that. How can we leverage the Fourth Industrial Revolution and the regional leadership to invest in building the ecosystem? Because this has been the hardest part. And as we have seen, examples like Souq.com or Kareem, this even leads to the broader economic prosperity of UAE and the rest of the Gulf region, if we can get entrepreneurs from these pre-emerging post-conflict economies. Thanks.
You get the center one.
Yeah, this is not, it's obviously a very important question, and I think there is one that a lot of people think about all the time. And the UAE has been working closely with the U.S. government and lots of partners on, particularly on extremism and violent extremism. And the general feeling from as the UAE is that it has to be a holistic approach. That again, there's no silver bullet that's going to solve these issues, and these issues are often socioeconomic. They're often rooted in a whole suite of issues that need to be addressed. And the only way we're going to work those out is as partnerships. The UAE alone is not going to solve this. The US alone is not going to solve it. Europe alone is not going to solve it. We all have to work together in partnership to address some of these really important issues. I think one of the things that I love about the UAE is that we don't claim to tell everybody that this is the way you should do it. What we do is we do what works for us. We talk about those experiences, we share them, and try to learn from other people's experiences. As you know, the UAE is a country of 200 nationalities, and we have a Minister of Tolerance and Happiness, and we try to encourage people to come and be part of our national project. So bringing in expertise from around the world to bring in the best that we can from around the world is really what we do. And I don't believe that we think that our model is something that is necessarily the way other people have to do theirs. But hopefully they can learn from the experience that we've had, and take those lessons and apply them in their own domestic or regional setting. So I think that the answer to your question really is partnerships. So working with the global community, working together with like-minded countries to try to address some of these really important challenges that you raised, that are so important not only for our region, but I think for the globe, for everybody. I mean, you can solve these issues in the Middle East, but these same issues exist in other parts of the world, and youth unemployment is something that we all have to think about and address. It's not unique to our region. Yeah.
I'll just add to that again. I would highlight more the public-private partnership piece of this, especially in a place like Iraq, where there's still a lot of development and infrastructure that needs to be either created from scratch or renovated, which makes it challenging given the security situation at the moment. But a country like the UAE, and oh, by the way, Morocco is another great example of what they've done from a solar standpoint, and even working with our neighboring countries like Algeria. But I think at the end of the day, good governance, sharing best business practices, being able to do that, whether it's joint working groups. I mean, here at the State Department or in Washington, we love having these planning meetings and working groups and whatnot, but I really think it could have more practicality in the region when you have that expertise, that longstanding expertise. And as he said, the models may not be exactly the same, but you could certainly pick and choose on what that good governance could look like and what that shared best practice may be.
Thank you. We have time for one final question.
Please.
Hi, I'm Rami from World Learning Organization. Thank you very much for Atlantic Council, and thank you very much for Julia, Majid, and Salah for this awesome discussion. I'm thinking how I can reflect this experience and these ideas for my country, Palestine. I came from Gaza Strip. You know, we are in Gaza Strip, have a very problem with the electricity, and it's just we under now 10 years without any electricity. We just get electricity from Israel for 100 megawatt, and from our bad generator station it's just 18 megawatt, and we got 20 megawatt from the Egyptian side. I know how much America and United Arab Emirates and Lebanon also give a lot of funds for Palestinian Authority and for the civil society. But I think it's main important for all of Gazans. You know, we are now 2 million persons in just 360 kilometers square. And I think it's very important that we need now electricity more than anything else. I know America and also UAE, since Sheikh Zayed and Sheikh Mohammed nowadays, give us a lot of millions of dollars, also Lebanon. So how can I reflect these projects inside my country, open sessions with the private sector, and to solve the problem, you know? And as you said for Salah, we can't separate politics away from development. And thank you.
I mean, sorry.
Do you want to go ahead? Or
just very quickly, I mean, this is a perfect environment for having the private sector come up with initiatives, specifically renewable energy initiatives. You have these ESCO companies where they would go and put the initial investment and then agree with communities on a payment scheme. So that's really the beauty of renewable energy, specifically solar. Other than this, you cannot rely on grants coming from other countries forever, because these grants are very much tied up to the political situation of the current period, and these are not non-sustainable projects that are self-defeating. But there is, I mean, renewable energy has created the opportunities for individuals in places like Gaza, in places all over Africa, where they can come with very minimal initial investment, do wonders in their communities.
Yeah, it's the pay-as-you-go method, if you will.
Yeah.
But I think you're exactly right. I mean, this is where even small to medium-sized companies, I'm not talking the large, big ones like an Exxon or a Chevron, coming in and being able to establish some small project, at least starting off. You know, I was at this event, a MENA event, but it was on social good, and I was surprised to hear that Gaza even has Uber there now. So it's amazing to see that there are these possibilities, and why can't we do that and expand that, especially in the renewable world and that arena, because the technology certainly exists, and it could address smaller remote areas where you may not be tied to a bigger grid.
So could I specifically
Please.
ask, what are some of the impediments to moving forward with something like this?
Well, again,
Why are we not already doing this?
I think we could always be doing more. I mean, again, I think the key piece of this as we look at diversification is how can we attract to that environment, that investment environment, because there certainly are these windows of opportunity. Whether you are in a developed country or developing country, there are ways to be able to expand upon the energy resources. And as I said earlier, in this discussion, you think about the interconnectedness of this. There's that term energy independence, but the reality is you have to think regionally. You have to think of what your neighbors are doing and how you can build upon that, because it will certainly turn into a geopolitical issue or a national security issue or an environmental issue. So it's important that when you think about building an energy project, particularly in the renewable aspect, how can that affect your neighbor and building upon that? So that's my takeaway as far as how we can implement some of these potential projects.
All right, thank you. Would you like to add anything?
I think that our conversation today has really shown that there's just a diversity of approach that you have to take, and so each actor in his region or area has to determine what works best for their particular circumstance. Renewable energy technologies and these new technologies are giving us an opportunity to deal with the challenges that previously might have seemed insurmountable. Now we have technologies that allow us to do things that we might not have been able to do before. So finding the right model that works for that particular area or the place where you want to deploy your technology is how things have to go. Diversified approaches. Yeah.
Thank you so much. So we'd like to thank our panel for their time, for a really interesting discussion. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you.